was my first meeting with Jerry. I was taking my daughter to the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. I think she was hoping for a hookup with the prince, who was there at the time. But I told her, you can be friends with that prince all you want, William, of course. But I don't want a romantic relationship. She said, Dad, why do you say that? Why? I said, you have to remember that the father of the bride has to pay for the wedding, and my after pension is not going to bankroll the royal wedding. So that's that. I just want to say hi and welcome again. You know, it really, there's nothing like a disaster to bring a lot of media people out. We're going to have a wonderful panel today. Everybody on this panel you've known and loved for many years. I want to bring them up now. Let me introduce them in alphabetical order. Let's see, Bill Baldini. Covered 3 Mile Island for Channel 10. Bill, where are you? There you are. The best dressed man at Broadcast Pioneers. How do you afford suits like that on a pension? Please, take a seat. Frank Goldstein. Worked for many years for Channel 10. There's Frank. Also at 3 Mile Island, everybody who you're going to see today was ticking and clicking. Marc Howard, where's Marc? Now in those days, in 1979, Marc was covering for Action News. Anywhere, take your pick. Richard Maloney, my friend and colleague from KYW News Radio. When he got up there and he didn't pass out, then I felt it was safe to go. Dick Sheeran, retired from Channel 3, KYW TV. And now Dick Standish, also Channel 3 retiree. You're right there. There's only one left. Where did you think you were going to go?
This is obviously a plan to get my mic cut off.
I'm right here. Do you know something? I came to Philadelphia in 1962 with the Philadelphia Bulletin's radio station. And in 1962, the Philadelphia Bulletin and many of the major papers in the country, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they had what they called science reporters. The Bulletins was a guy named Carl Abraham. And Carl was the only one who understood nuclear energy. But by the time we got around to 3 Mile Island in 1979, Carl had already been hired away from the paper and was working for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That left 0 people who knew anything about nuclear energy on any of the papers, at any of the broadcast stations, or any of the other media that was operating at the time. Now, before we're going to get right to the panel in a minute, but I want to read a couple of lines from the President's Commission on the accident at 3 Mile Island, dealing with the media, if I can see this. The conclusion was that a combination of confusion and weakness in the sources of information and lack of understanding at the media level left the media poorly equipped to serve the public. In other words, what they were saying is the guys at the top who knew something were too busy with what they were doing to spend much time with the media, and nobody at the media level who was thrown up to 3 Mile Island really knew science, knew nuclear energy. So, with that, Dick.
Well, I sought the great scientific minds at Cuppy's Diner in Middletown. Actually, the 3 Mile Island story was actually 2 parts. The part on a Wednesday was the first report that there was some problem there. And so I was sent out along with some other folks. And of course, to seek wisdom, the first thing you do, I'm a member of the reporting from Diner School, which of course is all the rage now. And the folks who were around Cuppy's Diner, they either worked at the 3 Mile Island facility, or they knew somebody, or they were the local folks. They weren't excited. But this was on Wednesday, and that's before the radioactive stuff hit the fan, which was really, it came into full fruition on Friday. That's when things got really nasty. But that Wednesday, we went out there, did some interviews. Yeah, we're not worried, no problem. William Scranton, who was the lieutenant governor at the time, he says everything's under control. So I drove back to Channel 3 in Philadelphia and said basically that. Well, of course, not too many hours later, then things just blew wide open.
Mark, how well equipped did you feel when you went up there?
Well, it's interesting because I had been a science student in college.
Oh, so we do this.
And I was, fairly knowledgeable as to how a nuclear reactor worked. But I remember at the time being impressed with the fact that it wasn't that people were afraid for no reason. They were afraid because they didn't know. And it was their lack of information that caused them to panic. But I remember when I saw Dick Thornburg show up and walk into the reactor building. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, they wouldn't let the governor go in there if there was any danger. And of course, somebody in the crew, Bob Feldman, who's here today, had a dosimeter with him that could read radioactivity. And there were no symptoms of it. In fact, I guess the true tragedy of 3 Mile Island was, it happened 12 days after the movie The China Syndrome came out.
Right.
The combination of that movie and the bad coverage of 3 Mile Island put a nail in the coffin of nuclear energy, which to this day, in fact, it was only 2 weeks ago, John McCain said the tragedy of the global warming community is that they're anti-nuclear power. It is the cheapest, safest, cleanest way to make electricity. But it's like some people won't fly in an airplane, and people get panicked and afraid of it. And I did, by the way, just a footnote, I asked Jerry Wilkinson why we were doing this program today. It's not an anniversary of anything, it's 38 years ago. And he said, I want to do it while you guys are still alive and can talk about it. He didn't want to take a chance waiting 2 more years. He wouldn't have enough for a panel.
That's good.
Right.
Frank, what's it like, arriving in a place like that, not knowing what the whole thing's about, and trying to do it through a viewfinder?
Well, Mark, we are still alive, and happy
Yes.
birthday. Mark recently turned 80. I don't know if
bless.
anybody can believe that. I have seen his driver's license, and it is true. I will take a cue from you and tell you that, yes, we are still alive, but unfortunately for many of us, including me, cancers, and for me it's heart disease, and for a number of other people it's thyroid problems, and the health issues continue. But along with the early days or the early hours at 3 Mile Island, we were getting different stories at different places. We got one story from the Dick Thornburg, the state camp. We got another story from the owners of 3 Mile Island. We got another story from the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And we really didn't know very much of anything about it, except I do know that I was in a helicopter over the cooling towers when the air traffic controllers called and said, better get out of there, they just released radiation. What I will tell you is, and Bill will tell you more of this, I'm sure, is the parade of the network people that came into WHP, the local CBS station in Harrisburg, and along with them, to their credit, they went to Columbia University and had a nuclear physicist with them who sat next to the reporter, the correspondent, and helped to explain what was going on. And that certainly helped to focus what the real dangers were. And the real dangers were then, but they continue today. And I'm thrilled that PCN is here because we'll talk a little bit later about a group in Harrisburg whose members I had hoped would join us, but were not able to because of illness, would tell you that the story continues. And we, as journalists in Philadelphia, I believe, have really missed the continuing story of 3 Mile Island.
I should have mentioned Bobby Kravitz was supposed to be with us, but he had to leave early, so we miss Bobby. Bill, you were flying there too.
Yes, and I'm going to respectfully disagree with that government report. What is true is none of the reporters I knew of knew anything about nuclear energy. But the real problem there was the constant changing of the guard in different stories. And frankly, I think they lied and lied and lied to us. And it took us a while to understand that. And as Frank mentioned, to CBS's credit at that time, they sent these experts in nuclear energy from Columbia University to sit next to me and the network reporter. And I would say, what did he just say? And he would, the guy would look at me and say, it's bullshit. It doesn't make any sense at all. Ask him this. And that's the first time we really start understanding we were getting this unbelievable snow job. In fact, the head of the public relations department for PICO, a guy named Neil McDermott, told me after that that situation was so bad that they use it in colleges to tell people what not to do during a disaster. And I remember him predicting this may be the end of nuclear energy because of them dropping the ball. All they had to do was to be honest. And let me give you one great example. Senator Schweiker at that time was a super hawk when it came to nuclear energy. And I kind of knew him, so I used to interview him all the time about it. And he said everything's just fine. He goes off to Washington to a party. And at that party were all these Hollywood stars and starlets. And Liz Taylor comes up to him and says, geez, it's really terrible what's happening at 3 Mile Island. He says, there's nothing happening there. She says, oh no, they had 2 releases today. He says, no, there's no releases, none. And treated her like she was a moron. He finds out an hour or 2 later that she is correct and he was being lied to day after day. He went ballistic. He went from a hawk to a dove when it came to nuclear energy. He was that angry and realized that something dramatically is wrong here. So that's just part of the story, and I just want to give other people a chance to speak.
Dick, the job of getting news every hour on the hour right into homes while trying to gather information at the same time wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't. Interesting looking back now on obviously how technology has changed. There was no internet then, no cable TV, no cell phones, no Google. There was one phone booth in front of the visitor center directly across the river from the plant itself. And when things got cooking out there, there was a line of about 20 people, 20 reporters from all over the country waiting to use this one cell phone there. I was fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, that before I began my broadcasting career, I spent 4 years in the Navy on a nuclear submarine. So I had some smattering of understanding of how it worked, and I understood the lexicon of the nukes. And the very first afternoon when the state police made their announcement, I rushed up to Harrisburg with everybody else. And I'll never forget the news conference right in front of the visitor center. There was a guy named Jack Herbine, never forget his name. And he was a Med Ed vice president who stood up there and said, no problem. Said there's been no release, everything's under control, and everything's cool. And you could tell right off the bat, it was he was dealing in what we now call alternative facts.
Fake news?
Fake news, unfortunately. But the story I'd like to convey is the problems we had in radio, and interesting working for a Westinghouse broadcasting company. The nuclear reactor was built by Westinghouse Electric. And after, I guess it was the second or third day, some bright person at Westinghouse Broadcasting, I don't know if it's KYW or not, called Westinghouse Electric in Pittsburgh and said, we have 3 or 4 people up there. Are they going to be okay? And the answer was, well, I wouldn't send any more. And the follow on that is they wouldn't send us an engineer. And all we had was, anybody remember alligator clips?
Yeah.
Sure.
We had a Sony Model 110 tape recorder and a mic and alligator clips. And Jay Lloyd had been working at the NRC down in Montgomery County. But then, in a business where none of us have any egos, Jay was at 3 Mile Island for that entire week. And he never got on the air because we didn't want Pittsburgh to know that he was up there. But here's a guy who has no ego whatsoever, working like mad, and he never got on the air.
That was true.
But what we did, there was a wonderful reporter from KDKA in Pittsburgh, our sister station, Fred Hansberger. Dick knows, certainly, we all know. And he had worked previously at WKBO in Harrisburg. And we're trying to figure out how we're going to get all this stuff on the air from several locations in the Harrisburg area. And Fred said, let's make a courtesy visit at WKBO. So we piled in a car and went out there. Excuse me. And Fred is a huge man, and I can't use that word. He was just, Dick's line on Fred Hansberger was to get a picture of, he has to be an aerial photograph. But he was just a wonderful, sweet guy. And we went and paid this courtesy visit at WKBO. And we walked through the offices, talked to everybody, went back in engineering. We all snuck out the back door. And we had stolen an entire radio station. We had mixers and mic cords and microphones and everything we needed. And piled it all in the car. And we were able to go to both Harrisburg and in Middletown and set up our own radio station without an engineer. Bud Gallo over there, who was a TMI vet. So the technology of the time worked to our advantage in the radio format, unlike it would today. Dick?
Yep. Dick? Standish.
I agree 100% with what Bill had to say about Met Ed. Let's call that lying and deception. But government could have done a much better job. The first day of the incident, I'm down here and I come back into the station from Jersey. They say, we need to do a story on what would happen to Philadelphia in a situation like this. And we need to know Philadelphia's plan for a nuclear emergency. Now, that was in the context of, like, say, Hiroshima and a nuclear bomb. It's not quite exactly the same thing, but regardless. So I go over to the fire commissioner, Joe Rizzo, who is also the civil defense chief. And Joe says, well, I was in the Navy in the South Pacific after World War II and very aware of testing and the power of the bomb and take it very, very seriously. If Philadelphians cannot cope with 6 inches of snow, they can't cope with a nuclear emergency. There is no plan. I thought that was great. I mean, here's a guy, a public official, who's not going to give you huff and fluff and puff. He was telling you the truth. And
that's a quote he gave you?
on tape.
That's what I mean.
Sure, right. But like I say, to me, he was what I would call an honest guy, you know. So that was the start of my experience with it. Go up to Harrisburg, talk about alligator clips and the technology just for a moment. Our key technology often was a $10 bill. We would take the $10 bill, insert it into the box that field tape was in, and one of us would run over to either the Harrisburg Railroad Station or this little platform in Elizabethtown and beg a conductor to take it downtown where a desk assistant would pick it up. I believe that there were probably a handful of times, Elizabethtown was a tiny stop, that an Amtrak train might have stopped, in our case, for eyewitness news, and no passengers, no nothing. So it all changed very, very quickly. A little more than a year after that, I would be live from both conventions, from the convention floor, totally 500% different. In terms of what could have been a plan, MedEd was terrible, but government could have done a lot more. Governor Thornburg's top civil defense, a main man for the state of Pennsylvania, admitted there were times he didn't know what recommendation to make to the governor of the state. Now, his point was because the information, the details, the facts coming out of the reactor site were such that he didn't actually know what the situation was. There was plenty of extra things like that. The phones at times over the jam, people couldn't even communicate with them themselves. The governor, we were talking about how scared people were and who wouldn't be. The estimates range between 80,000 and 200,000, 80,000 and 200,000 people fled. So I'm trying to come up with some kind of a people story that's just a hair different. And I checked the two animal shelters who tell me they are packed. They've never had as many pets brought in. If you ever had a dog or you know someone who had a dog, people fled abandoning their dogs. So all of a sudden here are all these excess animals. The shelters couldn't deal with them. But just to go over what it was like for people. Talking China Syndrome. You probably know that was a movie about a possible meltdown in California. Okay. Two great photographers of ours, Kenny Johnson and Tom Foley and I, one night go over to the East Harrisburg Mall to see a movie. We're going to see the China Syndrome. We know roughly what it's about. The anchor man in the film, Pete Martin, he resurfaced in Philadelphia Channel 3 as Stan Borman, went up to Crefeld Street and tried to tangle with Frank Rizzo. Sure you remember all of that. So Pete, in the film, has got his crew out in the field. There's the Kimberly Wells, who's Jane Fonda. And of course, she can miraculously go live from right in the control room. And she's got lined up for an interview Jack Lemmon, who is this distraught, conscientious technician. And he's trying to communicate just how serious this is. This is brief. How serious this is. And he says, you know, this could wipe out an area the size of Pennsylvania. The whole audience, we just went like that. It's the end of my ad lib, sorry.
Ad lib. Hey, I do have a question. You know, the commission actually did fault the people who were in charge there for a lack of communication. So the question I have is, those of you who felt you were lied to, Did you feel it was an intentional lie or a lie caused by confusion? Caused by lack of communication between the government's scientists
MedEd,
and the people who had to disseminate the information?
MedEd clearly was not prepared for this in terms of communication. And I think post Second World War and Korean War and Vietnam, this was the largest national story where we had people lying to us directly. On the other hand, I think there were two heroes in this whole thing. One, I think Dick Thornburg was a Pittsburgh lawyer, came out, he'd only been in office for 2 months when he took over. He was steady and he was deliberate, and he didn't speak until he was very sure what the answers were going to be. And I think back, if we had had Milton Schaap, who was his predecessor, as governor during this accident, things would have been very different in a very negative way.
Well, it's interesting. One of the reasons that I always thought that we overreacted was the fact that Thornburg showed up. Now, I'm sure that nobody would have allowed the governor of a state that large a state to show up in an area if they
To go
thought there was any
into
danger.
the system.
Right, and to actually go in.
Yeah, the other personality that emerged was Dr. Harold Denton.
That was
In
the other
fact,
one.
One of our storylines during one of those days was waiting for Dr.
Right,
Denton
yeah.
to come from Washington
Yeah.
and to save the world.
Right.
Well, the other,
And
I'm sorry.
he handled himself very well. as
He
I
was a
remember.
bureaucratic engineer,
Yeah,
but
but
he
he
was
knew his stuff.
terrific.
He knew his
And he
stuff.
stood in front of a
Harold
mob of
Denton.
reporters bigger than this room, filled
Yep.
with reporters from all over the country.
All over
Most
the
of them
world,
were
sir.
scared to death.
Yeah.
And he tried not to be a bureaucrat. He tried to speak English, and he didn't lose his own control.
One of the other things that we had at that point was Jimmy Carter was president, and he, of course, had been a nuclear engineer.
Yeah.
And the other thing was that there was no such thing as FEMA at that time. FEMA was born out of those issues at 3 Mile Island where there could be a central clearinghouse of information. So those things were born out of there.
Yeah, the thing built from the Wednesday, the initial reports, and then Friday it really erupted. And by Sunday, that's when Carter showed up. I think that as far as we were concerned, the reporters, we were used to covering fires in Kensington. I think on a Friday night there wasn't anything left to burn in Kensington. But, so this was all totally new to us. You name it, we covered it. But this was the first time we had to deal with anything like this. And that's what was scary, and you were kind of groping in the dark in a way.
The Saturday night of the hydrogen bubble, which was the biggest scare we had.
Yeah, the bubble.
That the whole thing was going to.
Yep.
And different
And-
stories
and
about
Den-
it.
Denton had a
was the
news
big-
conference with the governor at almost midnight.
Yep.
And after we'd all filed at 1 o'clock or so, we went to a place called Lombardo's, an Italian restaurant
Yeah.
bar in Harrisburg.
Yep.
And we all did about 4 drinks like this. And I have to mention the name of the late great Sandy Starobin, whom you probably all remember,
Yep.
who was just terrific covering the politics of all this in Harrisburg. Dick was talking about people leaving their pets. Sandy had sent his family away to his family home in North Jersey, but they'd left their dog at home. And we're sitting in Lombardo's, and Sandy had a couple of drinks, and he started to cry. He says, "I can't get to my dog." And then he put his head down and he said, "We're all gonna die." And we all just fell apart then. And this is 1 o'clock in the morning, and we've been working for 5 days.
You know what I find interesting? And you are absolutely right. We're always ready to go to that fire.
Oh, yeah.
Always ready to go to that gunfight down
Yep.
in OK Corral. But when this happened, several reporters would not go. And because their wives were afraid they're going to become sterile.
Yeah.
And I remember my wife saying to me, "Are you out of your mind?" And I thought, this is what I do. You just go. And we used to wear those dosimeters. And I used to look at mine every day. And CBS, after they found out these people were lying all the time, sent buses to Harrisburg. The bus ran 24/7
Multiple buses.
and they had spacesuits in for everybody from CBS. So if we had to evacuate, You didn't even have to start the bus. You
Buses
just jumped in and you got your spacesuit and you took off.
And they
So-
also had a diesel truck there with diesel fuel to refuel them as they needed.
It was so insane because I remember standing there and one of our reporters, after about 3 days, I won't mention his name, he got depressed. He used to get, every day he got more and more scared. After the third day, he was in such distress that I had to actually smack him like you see in the movies, just to bring him back to reality.
To put some perspective on the fear versus reality, it was 2011 when Fukushima reactor in Japan went from the tidal wave.
Right.
There were 0 injuries caused by radiation. Nobody died. And to this day, if you look up on the wires, nobody died from radiation in Fukushima, but 1,600 people died from stress-related ailments, strokes, heart attacks, panic. 1,600 people, and totally unfounded. I mean, I hate to say unfounded, but it was just fear.
Well, what I have found out,
One of the things that Richard didn't mention in KYW was that our dosimeters didn't show up until the day before we were leaving.
Well, they gave us
And 5 years later, I had a baby.
a little piece of film.
and
We
that
all-
film,
And that film
We'll have some
showed no
questions from the
radiation.
audience.
yes, except I've recently learned that the isotopes that were released from 3 Mile Island may not have been isotopes that would have shown up on that film, because your station across the street from ours, I ran over to Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, and they were kind enough to give us the film dosimeters. But and a lot of the radiologist issues are from radiologists who do x-rays or radiology therapy. What we need to do today, and it's starting, is to deal with radiological engineering, who are also involved in medical practice in some manner, because those of us who were exposed have issues that are now coming to the fore that are related to 3 Mile Island. Terry Ruggles, who wanted to be here but is enjoying the sun in Cuba right now, has had and has survived testicular cancer. Bobby Kravitz has had numerous issues. I have issues. There are some people up here who have thyroid issues, and some people in the audience who have thyroid issues. And there's a movement now nationally that's starting to publicize this among those of us journalists who were there. And like Bill was saying, everybody's saying, yeah, while we do run out to go to those fires and jump in the helicopter and go fly over refineries, we are so ill prepared. We are so much more ill prepared than even Joe Rizzo was. We are sent constantly to these things. And who knows if we're over a refinery fire in a helicopter and it's producing benzene, which is a carcinogen. We don't know what we're going to, and we don't even have any of the equipment, the respirators or anything like that might be appropriate, nor do we have any training. I served on the Bucks County Emergency Planning Commission for a number of years, and the training that firemen have, we ought to have, because we ought to know what we're facing and how we're facing it. And there's even, and I don't want to take too long, there's even the fact that when you drive by a fuel truck or any kind of tank truck, you'll see a placard on it with numbers in black and white. Those numbers indicate what chemical is being carried. And the Department of Transportation puts out a book that's free to all of us that tells you what that chemical is and what you should do, how far away you should stay, and what the antidote is, and all those things. And for those of us who do go to fires or see fire engines today, the fire engines all have flags on them. And we might think, wow, that's really cool that they're American flags. They're only on there to tell them what the wind direction is, so that they can park their fire equipment downwind of the chemical or whatever it is. And we don't know what it is that's burning and what it is that we're experiencing.
But in the case of 3 Mile Island, it should be noted, 38 years after something happens, causality is very difficult to prove. It may be so, but it's very difficult to say that from that came this.
And that's why there's a group in Harrisburg called TMI Watch who is monitoring everything. And they're looking at trees 30 miles away from the cooling towers, where the half side of the tree that's facing 3 Mile Island is dead. The other side is not.
The question is, in 1979, who could we, as you're asked to go to 3 Mile Island, who could we have asked, what can we expect when we get there as far as our personal safety? Who?
Well, nobody knew,
Nobody.
because there had been no experience.
Yeah. Nobody knew, right?
Precisely.
The first effort to even show this off to the world was the movie that came out 12 days before 3 Mile Island,
Yeah.
the China Syndrome. I mean, that's the first time the subject ever came up. But there just haven't been that many nuclear accidents. The biggest tragedy, I still think, is that there's not been one application for one new nuclear power plant since 3 Mile Island.
Interesting fact is, you mentioned Fukushima. Fukushima and Chernobyl, two of them followed. And Chernobyl was much worse.
56 died.
Yeah, and thousands were affected. They were similar plants in terms of their basic design, but their construction was not. And the meltdown within the TMI reactor core was equal to those other two. But the containment building was so much stronger that it didn't get out.
The
It
Chernobyl
worked.
people died from the blast.
Right.
Right.
Well, which was the blast is what's
Yeah, no, I know.
what we
Your
were
point is
worried
right.
about.
Yeah, you're right.
And it
That
never
was the
happened.
bubble.
And the bubble.
That was probably the most dramatic part, other than the thing in
Right.
general.
Right.
The bubble, I mean,
Right.
that was it. Is
Yep.
this thing gonna blow? I mean,
And now there's a
One of the
belief.
things that was incredibly impressive was when you looked at the media core that was there, I'm just wondering if you guys noticed it too, but I thought I saw an extremely large number by ratio of Japanese reporters.
Absolutely.
They cleaned out everyone they had in New York, everyone they had in Washington, and got them to 3 Mile Island, and then sent others over from Japan.
And that's obviously because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
they related to it.
And Terry Ruggles and I did a piece on all of the different people, the different reporters from all over the world who were there to cover that. That was clearly the center of the universe. And not only that, but Bill mentioned about the buses at WHP. We were also told, if something happens and the sirens go off, Bill, what were we told?
Take off.
Take off. Leave your equipment. Leave
off.
it there. Don't worry about it. Just get to WHP to get out. And of course, Dick, I think you mentioned, or Richard, you mentioned no cell phones or anything. When CBS came in, and that was quite a parade at WHP. When they came in to take over WHP, much like you took over the radio station, first there were the executive producers, then the correspondents. Bill will tell you about a briefcase in a minute. Correspondents, then came the crew, but then came the most important, the deli trays from New York. They were there too. But they were told, they decided that the best way to find out what was happening was to send somebody out and buy a dozen CB radios.
The other fact that we always overlook in these discussions is the number of people who have lived near a coal-fired power plant, and how many of them died of lung disease, and how many of them died from various other ailments that come from breathing in smoke, and how many coal miners died of black lung disease in the mines. All the other deaths that come, on balance, according to Senator McCain, nuclear energy still is the safest, cleanest way to make electricity if you have to have electricity.
And several years
What you and Bill described as the preparations that CBS made for you, was that unique to CBS?
No.
Or was NBC and ABC, were they doing the same thing?
That was
Remember any help from NBC?
That was the
I don't remember
debut.
We were on our own.
I don't remember any preparation. I don't remember any sense of
That was the debut of Diane Sawyer. She was brand new, and they came in and they built a wooden plywood studio right in front of the visitor center, so you could have the shot of her sitting there looking at the towers of TMI.
And on
and
that-
it was comical. It was just.
And on that platform, they put a camera with a microwave link back to WHP, and in the lower corner of that, they had a Geiger counter 24 hours a day so that they could see independently what it was. Bill, will you share what Threlkeld brought in?
Yes, what happened at the station, we Bigfooted the station. Then CBS Bigfooted us.
Yeah, exactly.
And this guy, Richard Threlkeld, comes in with this leather briefcase, beautiful piece of equipment, puts it on the desk, he opens it up, and there's a bottle of scotch in there. That's it. And he starts pouring and starts writing. I mean, it was incredible.
Old school journalism.
Yeah. I mean, even I was surprised. Hey, but that's the way it is. It was crazy. And I'm thinking back, and I remember a couple of times thinking, are we crazy?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
up there, like the third day, you said,
Yeah.
am I out of my mind staying here? But you just do
And
it.
we called home and we were asked by our wives, and my wife of 49 years is here, and God bless her. When it was finally time for me to come home, Melanie said, our kids were 1 and 2. Melanie said, what do I have to do to decontaminate you before you hug the children?
Interestingly, channels 10 and 3 were owned by networks
Yeah.
at that time, and Channel 6 was not. So we didn't have anybody above us telling us what to do and panicking and all that.
No.
No, we were Westinghouse.
We
were Westinghouse.
We were an affiliate of NBC.
We were Westinghouse. right.
Gentlemen,
But
we wanted,
CBS, I think,
Yes.
had much more.
They were big.
And also, you had people up there who could worry and imagine and have buses full of.
The bottom line was, and I have to give CBS credit, their attitude was, money is no excuse to miss anything. I remember a sound man dropped his box, there's something wrong with it. He called in and they said, he was in the woods, leave it there, buy a new one. Their attitude was, it doesn't matter, spend whatever you have to spend, and that those buses were unbelievable. 24/7 they ran those suckers.
Nobody else had that.
No.
No.
The other thing, the confusion about all this was people thought those cooling towers were actually the nuclear plant.
Yeah.
Right.
of course.
You know, that was the symbol.
And they also think that it's smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not smoke.
And the cooling towers became the whole trademark, the visuals of it all.
And I felt that the fear was inversely proportional to the distance. The more we reported on things back to Philadelphia, New York, and the rest of the country, I think the more fearful they were. A lot of the people who were left in the Middletown, Harrisburg area, I think that they were more calm
They
than
did.
most.
I remember going to the York High School, York, Pennsylvania High School Gymnasium on that Friday when it really
Hit the fan.
hit the fan, and the people were there. There was very little panic. I mean, they were in the gymnasium. They set up cots and whatnot. But yeah, you're right. You're right about that.
But the
further
bottom line
away you
was,
got,
the first couple of days, I remember doing a story right in the middle of town. And my story was, there is no one here.
yeah,
Right.
I could scream, I could yell, it was echoes, and I remember thinking it came right out of a sci-fi movie. You know, I was just absolutely shocked that everybody took off. There was no one there, everybody decided,
well, what
hey, I'm not taking
contributed
a
to that
chance.
too was the following day was the opening of fishing season. I forget what fish, but everybody immediately had a pole and they were on their way out of town. They used it as an excuse.
you don't mean that gefilte fish week.
No, not the
Trout
gefilte fish. Hey, guys.
That was one
gentlemen,
big gefilte fish.
We would like to leave. That's another story. We'll tell you later. We would like to leave some time open right now for any comments, questions. Liz?
Yeah, Liz Mack. At that time, I was writing, actually, I left Channel 3, and I was writing television features for the Philadelphia Journal tabloid paper. And I remember, like everybody else, trying to find my sidebar, my angle, and calling all of the stations and saying, would you send any women to this dare you send any women to this? And reflecting upon that coming today, I was embarrassed to think that that's the kind of sidebar I thought of at that time, at 30 years old. But now as I listen to Frank and the urgency of his comments, I think, well, I guess I either responded appropriately in context, or it turned out to be that I'm looking at 6 men on this stage and 2, you know.
I think that there were very, very few, if any, women on the street in '79.
Well, you know, the original evacuation order was for pregnant women. That was the first evacuation order. Then, of course, it grew. But that consideration was right off the bat.
And I also,
And when Met Ed heard that you had to get your pregnant women out of the control area, those few that worked there, they were moved, but they weren't on duty, so you couldn't pay them. Fine firm.
and don't forget, the hazard was not the smoke or the steam. The hazard was what we couldn't see,
Yeah, it was
smell,
invisible.
touch,
The whole thing was
feel.
invisible.
That was what we were hearing. And one of my colleagues, if I may, you want to call on
Who do we have here?
Irv?
Irv. Where's Irv? Oh, there's Irv. Yeah.
Came back from 3 Mile Island. All of us were shepherded over to Jefferson Hospital, where we were all examined and our badges were checked out and things like that. And the doctor told us that it's possible that in 20 years from now, you possibly could have an enlarged thyroid. And this is personal because 20 years from then, I had an enlarged thyroid. And thank God it was not cancerous. But it was just weird that he would say that. In 20 years, almost to the day, they diagnosed me with an enlarged thyroid. And other people are, as you said, have different kinds of cancer. So we still don't know, what lasting effects, those of us who were there at the time, the lasting effects we have, because nobody really knows anything about it, I think.
And to follow up on that, Irv, a federal judge, her name is Judge Rambo, enjoy that, several years ago shut down the possibility of litigation against 3 Mile Island or any of the owners or associates. So there is no potential litigation, although there may be some things going on potentially for those of us with regard to workers' compensation, but that's very negligible compared to it. The point is that my feeling is, and as many of you may know, I was a labor leader in Philadelphia, and safety was always on top of my mind. And I believe that we really need to go back to our crews on the street and get them properly and completely trained in the basics, that the same kinds of things that a firefighter would know. And know, when I started out, anybody remember a wonderful camera guy named Harold Hodgman? Harold taught me when I was riding with him, when you're going to a fire, the first thing you want to look at is which way the smoke is blowing, because you don't want to be on that side. You want to be on the other side so your pictures are better. Well, now you want to be on the other side because there's less chance of any of the carcinogens that are blowing away from that fire to affect you.
Yes.
We live in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, which is within the 10 miles of 3 Mile Island. We're now within about 3 miles. And my wife and I were in San Francisco at a conference. Matter of fact, at that time, we also experienced our very first earthquake. Remember that? And the news came on and talking about some kind of nuclear disaster. And then they said, Middletown, Pennsylvania. And our kids were there. Jonathan was born in 1978 and Mel was born in 1973. So they were quite young. Someone was taking care of them. Well, naturally, we wanted to find out, so we tried to call. You couldn't. The phones were all jammed. Finally, we got through and says, well, what's happening? What's happening? And I said, what do you mean? Well, there's this problem with 3 Mile. Oh, that's nothing. They haven't done anything. Meantime, the San Francisco papers, and I remember one from October and from Ottawa, women and children flee nuclear reactor. That was their title. That was their headline. So we came back, and I still remember. Have any of you seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Remember when you had the spaceship and all? That's what it looked like as we flew over Unit 1, because the Harrisburg International Airport is on the other side of the river, and 3 Mile Island is an island. So it's further over in the Susquehanna than it would be if they were on the shore. And I worked for the state at that time. And the supervisors where I was working said, no, you just stay there. We need you to work here at the work. And so that's what happened. And little by little, it came out. I was playing with a band at the time, and we were supposed to appear at a function in Edders, which is right across. And I said, no, you got to go there, and so on. Maybe you remember the story about the bubble? Yeah. The bubble, yeah. And the word we got was this great big bubble, which contained a lot of nuclear chemical hydrogen, was supposed to burst that night. Well, it didn't. It didn't, thank God it didn't. But to this day, every year, we get this booklet from Exelon Nuclear telling us how to get out in case there was another disaster like that. So,
Thank you.
just wanted you to know.
Lee, did you have a comment? I saw your hand up.
Well, it's a matter of 20/20 hindsight now. Thank you. As you know, if you're given an assignment, you go right, you want to be the first on the scene, the first to get there. So nothing could stop you at that time from going, I'm sure. But looking back and knowing what you know today and the potential hazards that you still may face, would you do it again?
Yes.
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 Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely.
Maybe not at
Stupid as
this
it
age.
sounds, yes.
And for Richard Maloney, so what is the smoke that comes out? The scary looking smoke you say that isn't dangerous?
It's water vapor.
It's what
Steam.
Water, it's a cooling.
Steam.
It's when my kids were small, we used to live out in that Collegeville area by Limerick. And I convinced my kids that that's where clouds came from. It was the cloud machine. And it's
Thank you.
exactly the same thing as clouds. It's water vapor.
But now that you mention Limerick, let's talk for a second about the pump. We have taken, after 3 Mile Island, it was determined that the water that goes back into the Schuylkill has to be cooled to the point of the water that was going in to cool the reactor. So PICO decided that the only way they could have that water cooled to that temperature was to take water from the Delaware River above New Hope, pump it all the way across Bucks and Montgomery County, and in some cases reverse the flow of the Neshaminy Creek to be able to have enough water to cool those reactors so that they could go online, because they were being built before 3 Mile Island happened. So it continued with tremendous amount of protest and challenges in Bucks County north of New Hope.
the Point
Just as
Pleasant
an
pump.
aside.
Remember that, the pump.
Is there anybody? Yes.
I'm Dan Rapak. I was the ENG supervisor at the ABC affiliate in Harrisburg, Channel 27, when this happened. And you made the comments about the two heroes, Dick Thornburg and Harold Denton. I'd just like to expand on that a little bit, if I might. I wrote a book called Brought to You By, which is a memoir of 37 years behind the scenes in the business. I was as a broadcast engineer. And a chapter in that book is devoted to 3 Mile Island. And I wanted to make sure I got the technical ins and outs correct and got in touch with Harold Denton and actually went over what occurred at the time of the accident. I spent over an hour on the phone with him, and we were kind of getting technical. It was a very interesting conversation, and he had some tremendous things to say. But one of the things that I learned was that, first of all, it was Dick Thornburg who finally got a phone call through to Carter, and again, the phone lines were jammed, and it was very difficult to get that communication to Washington. And basically, Dick Thornburg told Carter, look, they're not telling us the truth. We don't know what's happening. I need to make decisions on whether or not people need to be evacuated. Can you send me someone who can get the facts for me? And Harold Denton was the guy he sent.
Yep.
And if you guys don't remember Harold Denton, he was kind of an everyman kind of guy, very soft-spoken, plain kind of guy you'd have over to dinner any day of the week. Talking to him on the phone, he mentioned something just kind of in passing that I hadn't really thought about. No one who covered the event talked about this, and I haven't heard anyone talk about it since. There were over 100 people that came up from Washington, from the NRC, and from the Department of Energy to try to tame the reactor, and people that were out taking measurements, air measurements, water samples, you name it. Those people are heroes too, just like the first responders to 9/11 as far as I'm concerned. Because these were guys who, you know, if you're going to be a police officer, you know you're going to be putting yourself in harm's way when you take the oath and you put the uniform on. Same way if you're a professional firefighter. These guys were desk jockeys. These were guys that put on a shirt and tie, went to work, maybe pushed papers around, might have had a slide rule at that time on the desk, that kind of thing. And they said, hey, we need you to go to Harrisburg and help quench a nuclear reactor. Those guys came. They were first responders. They knew what they were getting into because they did understand how the reactors worked. And they knew about radiation, and they knew all the dangers. Those 100 and some people came anyway. And I think those people are kind of unsung heroes that no one has ever talked about. That really need to...
I couldn't agree with you more. In the Middletown Firehouse, where they had a lot of the news conferences, or the VFW hall there,
Right.
where you had hundreds of reporters, a lot of those engineers spent a lot of time in little huddles with reporters saying, this is what an atom is, this is what a proton is, and giving us the very basics of the information. They were terrific. I agree completely.
And with Harold Denton, first of all, he was not a doctor. And in fact, I think at his first press conference, he said, I'm not Dr. Harold Denton. Dr. Denton is the pajama guy.
That's right.
Yeah,
That was a brand of kids' pajamas.
That's how we remembered him.
Yeah.
Yes. But he had an uncanny ability to go inside that plant, speak in technical engineering terms with the operators of the plant, walk outside the plant, go to the press conference, and condense that down into layman's terms that the reporters, the government officials, and the public could understand. And that just had such a tremendous effect of calming the situation down. And what a lot of people don't understand is that while he was doing all of that, he was also supervising those 100+ people that were out doing all that other stuff. Tremendous man. And by the way, he just passed away in March.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that.
I have also no recall, Bill, I don't think you or Terry, I don't remember anybody calling it a disaster.
No.
No.
I think we were exceptionally cautious in the manner in which we reported the issues. And I will also say that there were a number of confrontations in that fire hall, Richard, between the people who were presenting and the journalists who were saying, well, we're being told this by somebody, and MedEd is telling us something else, and you know we were begging the truth.
Right. Think about this. How would it be covered today?
Oh, my God.
With the situation in the media right now? How would it be covered today?
You know, with a 24-hour news cycle,
I mean,
it
would there be
just
panic or
unbelievable.
not?
Oh, that'd be panic.
I think so.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Of
Yeah.
course.
As a
there'd be
matter of
panic.
fact, they'd be
When you
encouraged to
look-
panic the people.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when we get breaking news stories about a half ball rolling down a sewer in Manayunk, just think of the real deal.
Come on, Dick, a half ball can't roll.
Yes, it
Yeah,
can.
it rolls.
Yes,
Oh,
it can. It can roll.
Yeah.
Oh,
Roll
absolutely.
down on Hitch Street where I played half ball.
Okay. The witching hour has come.
Yep.
We're getting close to our time.
Jay, the witching hour was in March of '79.
79.
Yeah, right.
that's-
You got that right.
I want to thank everybody for being here, and particularly the panel, Dick Sheeran, Marc Howard, Frank Goldstein, Bill Baldini, Richard Maloney, and Dick Standish.